Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here. There's a lot to cover this evening, so before I jump in, I would like to thank Reproductive Possibilities for partnering with New England Fertility to bring you tonight's webinar. I'm Stephen Clappow. I'm the Director of Marketing at New England Fertility, and I'd like to thank you all for choosing to spend the next hour or so with us to learn about the medical and legal aspects of surrogacy. And we're going to get some insights from a couple who have become parents through surrogacy. And we're also going to hear from a gestational surrogate. We've got a lot to cover tonight. So I'm going to get right into telling you a little bit about our panelists. The first being Melissa Brisman, the CEO and founder of Reproductive Possibilities. Melissa's been helping couples become parents of babies via surrogacy since 1996. She was her own first client, guiding and directing the process. And she and her husband became parents of twin boys and later a daughter, all with the help of a gestational carrier. Her knowledge and her expertise has allowed her to create an agency staff that is prepared to successfully help parents build their family. And as an attorney, Melissa's been instrumental in creating the law in many states to have parents named on their children's birth certificates when delivered by a gestational carrier. Melissa's a true pioneer in the field, and she's helped bring over 2,800 babies to happy parents around the world. And speaking of happy parents, I'd also like to introduce Natalie and Harold. They are the parents of a beautiful girl who just turned 2, and they had her via surrogacy, and they are ready to add to their family, and hoping this year will bring them another joyful bundle. They're joining us to share their experience with surrogacy and speak about their relationship with the gestational carrier. And that's who's on my next on my list of introductions. Stephanie is a nurse and a mother of 3, but as a surrogate, she has delivered 7 babies to 5 families. So if you do the math, that's actually 2 of those pregnancies being full-term twins. So there's no denying that delivering babies is her calling. She's not planning to become a surrogate again, but in her new role as a midwife, Stephanie is going to be focusing her attention on helping others deliver their miracles. And Stephanie's worked with domestic and international intended parents. And she's here this evening to share her experiences and talk about her relationships with those intended parents. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to someone I'm fortunate enough to work with every day, and that is Dr. Gad Levy. Dr. Levy is the founder and medical director of New England Fertility Institute, which is now in its 30th year and has helped create more than 10,000 babies. Our clinic has the distinction of being the first non-hospital-based outpatient IVF facility in Connecticut. Dr. Levy received his training at Hadassah Medical School at Hebrew University in Israel, and he completed his residency at Yale University School of Medicine in New Haven, where he served on the medical faculty of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Before starting New England Fertility, Dr. Levy was an assistant professor in the Division of Reproductive Endocrinology at Yale University, and he served as the director of Yale's Program for Assisted Reproduction. So with that, I think this is a perfect opportunity to actually hand things off to Dr. Levy. And Dr. Levy, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for putting this together. We're very excited, and I'm very excited to have all our other panelists here today. Of course, Melissa, who is a colleague and a friend, and we've been working together for many years, more years than I'm willing to admit at this point. Of course, we're very fortunate, and I think probably the stars of the evening are not us, but the intended parents and the surrogates. So Harold, Natalie, and Stephanie, who basically will share their experience with you. So I'm going to try to be brief and essentially give more time for them to talk. But what I'd like to tell you that, doing surrogacy, doing egg donation, doing any of those combinations, is basically, it's a team effort. And we have the entire team that essentially focuses on you and the parents. And the team includes the clinic, and I'll talk about in a minute, and the agency, which Melissa will talk to you about, and of course, you know, the surrogates and the egg donors. And each participant in this team actually has their role. And also our role is to make sure that everything sort of works together, because as you can imagine, as you'll see in a minute, there's quite a few moving parts in this process. So we need to make sure that everything sort of runs smoothly and safely and successfully. So just very quickly, and again, each one of those, I can probably talk to you for a long time, but I'm going to tell you a few words about myself, about basically what we do and what the agency does for this process. We'll talk about the egg donors, the surrogates, how we find them, how we screen them, how we make sure that they will be good, and I'll explain what that means. And of course, the actual process. I'll talk a little bit about how we manage the sperm, and in this context, of course, we'll talk a little bit about COVID, which is always sort of the big elephant in the room, and how we manage through all of that. So yes, the next slide, please. Stephen is in charge. All right. So basically, I think Stephen already made the introduction, but about the clinic. But basically, what I'd like to say that, you know, from the very beginning, doing what we call third-party reproduction, basically egg donation, surrogacy, has always been my passion. You know, when I left the university and started my own clinic, we sort of were a general fertility clinic, but over time, over the years, we focused, and right now are primarily doing the egg donation and surrogacy arrangements. Just because it's sort of our niche and something that we do well, and we have the infrastructure for it, we have all the regulatory issues in place. So this is what we do. And of course, to do this process, you need to work with a fertility clinic and with an agency. And of course, each clinic and each agency has their own character. I would say it's probably a reflection of the person in charge. So for that reason, actually, we love working with Melissa and her agency. But it's really, really important for this process to work well, is that the clinic and the agency communicate constantly. And that basically, even though you're working with two separate entities, it's basically should be seamless. And this is, again, one of the reasons that I like working with Melissa's team, because we manage basically many of the things that happen behind the scenes work very well. So very, very briefly, you know, I will outline here what we do as the clinic, and Melissa will sort of give you more about what they do. But essentially, when you're looking for a surrogate, you start with the agency. They find a surrogate for you based on the criteria that you give them and the criteria that we give them, the medical criteria. And once you find someone that you think or they think is a good match for you, they will send us her medical records to review and make sure that everything is good. Mostly the fact that, you know, we only take surrogates who have children, which allows us then to review their pregnancies, deliveries, many other things, compliance with the doctor is, the hospital, and that way we make sure that we pick the right person. Once we approve of the records of the surrogate, we invite the surrogate to the clinic. And that's a really, really, in my opinion, a very important part of this process, because we invite her to come in, we invite the parents to come in. She goes through her medical testing, psychological testing, and sort of the highlight of that clinic visit is that we introduce, usually for the first time in person, the parents and the surrogate. Give an opportunity to make sure that you communicate well, you connect well, because again, at the end, it's a matter of chemistry, and at the end of that day, we basically know if it's a match. So if you like her and she likes you, yeah, go back for a minute. Previous slide. Yeah. So, and then essentially once that screening is over, we send you back to the agency, you do the contract, and soon after that, we schedule the procedure, which is the embryo transfer. So yeah, please, next slide. And again, I think without getting into too much detail, you know, for me, the most important part of this process is making sure that we've done our job in screening both the egg donor and the surrogate, making sure that they're, you know, medically clear, medically good, making sure that they're psychologically intact, healthy, but also we spend a lot of time on making sure that they understand the extent of the commitment. And, you know, I think Stephanie can talk to you more about that, but it's really a big, I want to make sure that the surrogate, the egg donor understand what they're doing. I want to make sure that they don't, you know, wake up 5 years from now and say, oh my God, what did I do? So we spend a lot of time on the psychological evaluation. Of course, for the egg donor, we also do some genetic screening, and we also do the infectious disease screening that's required by the FDA. So again, all these things are done to make sure that you have a good egg donor, you have a good surrogate, and that you have a successful process. Next, please. And just basically in one slide, I will show you how the process works. And, you know, we're talking about in vitro fertilization, which is a technology that's sort of probably by now has matured. It's no longer experimental. And we do basically this process in two very distinct parts. The first part is, as you see here, is the creation of the embryos. And to do the embryo, to make the embryos, we basically will put usually the egg donor or the intended mother through a course of medication for about 2 weeks. The purpose of the drugs is to boost the egg production. And at the end of those 2 weeks, she has a procedure where the eggs are harvested. The eggs are taken, fertilized. We grow the embryos in the laboratory for 5 or 6 days to make sure that we can identify the most viable embryos. And in addition to that, we also do genetic testing of those embryos, again, to make sure that we know which embryos are genetically balanced or chromosomally balanced. Because the key is that once we have those embryos, we want to be able to identify one embryo and use that embryo in the surrogate and expect to get a 70 to 80% success. So the way we do that is we basically pick the best of the best. So the end of the first step, we make the embryos, grow them, test them, and at the end of that process, all the embryos are frozen. And you know, the technology today is such that doing the genetic testing, growing the embryos in the lab, freezing them and thawing them does not affect in any way their viability. So we're very comfortable doing it this way, which then allows us the flexibility of having the embryos ready and usually wait for the surrogate to come along. So the surrogate, we find the surrogate, we make sure that she's well screened, and then prepare her for the embryo transfer. So the second part is putting the embryo into the surrogate. It takes about 3 weeks to get the surrogate ready. And then we usually will take one embryo out of the freezer and put her in her uterus. I say one embryo because that's sort of become sort of the holy grail of IVF. We try to identify the best embryo so we can use only one and still get a high success. However, there are certain circumstances where people desire or really want to have twins. And in those cases, we can discuss, of course, you know, there's an increased risk for twin pregnancy, but if you find the right surrogate who is not only willing, but also able to carry twin based on her history, I am amenable to that. That's something we can discuss. So in the bottom there, you see the success, and with, I said about 70 to 80% with one embryo. With two embryos, the success is over 90%, and there's about 60 or 70% of twins. So just one final word. I mean, people often come and say, well, we want to have a high success. We don't really want to have twins. but let's do 2 embryos and hope we only get 1. I don't think that's a good idea. So again, that's where we have a discussion and we finally get to a point where everyone is sort of on the same page. Yes, the next slide, please. I put this here because, you know, this is actually for, we work, of course, with people who are in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And of course, this, you know, COVID has affected us in many ways, but not the least of which is the travel, that there's very difficult to travel nowadays. So we still actually manage, and you know, interesting about COVID is that it forces us to look at our processes and come up with different ways to do the same thing. And one of the things that we've learned is the fact that we can actually start the process without the parents actually having to travel. So this is particularly relevant for couples who are using an egg donor and using the partner sperm. And then it doesn't really matter where they are. We can basically do the screening, the testing remotely and have their sperm collected locally and frozen and shipped to us. So that allows them to start the process without actually visiting the clinic. Of course, we always like to see people in person, but again, if you want to start the process and you're worried about travel, there is a way to do that. Next, please. You know, one thing that I did mention at the beginning is that, you know, as the clinic, we also, in most cases, in many cases, provide the egg donor. So we have our own egg donor pool, our own donor database. These are donors that we recruit, we screen, we know well. And usually we offer those first, but you're not really limited to using our donors. We have about 100 donors in our database. We love our donors, but I understand that it's a matter of personal preference. So if you don't find a donor in our database, we basically will help you find a donor in external databases, and there's many of those. And I can say that with confidence that if you intend on doing this process, you will find an egg donor. It may take you a month or 2 months or 3 months. And usually, you will find your egg donor before you find your surrogate. So which means that once we find the donor and we have the sperm, we can make the embryos, and then the embryos essentially wait until the surrogate is ready. So you choose the surrogate. Typically with a donor, we get quite a few eggs with the medication. So about 15 or 20 eggs. And the reason we actually like to get that many, as you can see, there is a significant drop off. And at the end, we end up with usually about 5 or 6 genetically normal embryos. So it sounds like a big drop, but keep in mind that each one of those embryos is a very strong, viable embryo with a very high success. Just a few words about COVID, because, of course, it's on everyone's mind, and we sort of think maybe we have the light at the end of the tunnel, but every time we think that, something else happens. So for just briefly our history, when COVID first happened, we basically closed the clinic because we didn't really know what impact it might have on pregnancy, and the pregnant woman, and the baby, and so forth. We waited until we got more data. So we closed and opened in late April, early May. And we've been essentially since then doing all the procedures we've done previously. But as I said before, we sort of adapted to the new reality and doing them a little bit differently. Now, the reason I felt comfortable moving forward, and this was way before, of course, we had any idea that the vaccine is coming. The reason I thought it would be fine to start up again is for the following reason. And this is sort of the data that started coming out of China initially, and then of course from the US. So for example, we know that for whatever strain reason, the virus doesn't really go to the sperm or to the eggs. Doesn't, the reproductive tract doesn't have receptors for the virus. So that was reassuring. Even more reassuring was the fact that we know that even if a woman becomes infected during her pregnancy, the virus does not go to the fetus. Very rarely does. Different than Zika, for example, where the virus does go to the fetus and causes a lot of damage. So, that was very helpful, very important to know. And also, for most part, again, of course, there's always exception, because the women who are pregnant are usually younger and healthier. They generally, go through the COVID infection with less complications, less issues. So, that basically allowed us to say, okay, well, we can start. And then, of course, like I said, we have very strict protocols in place, both in the clinic and also when we deal with surrogates. We have to consider, the surrogate, her family, her work environment, her travel. So we created protocols for this. We test the surrogates and make sure that they're negative before they start and during this process. And again, just to bring it up to tell you that even though, there's really nothing is 100%, but I feel very comfortable that, we can do this process safely, even without the vaccine. And just one word about the vaccine, because it looks like it's getting more and more, becoming more and more available. So at the moment, it's definitely recommended to anyone who has access to get it. It's definitely recommended for women who are planning to become pregnant. And this includes surrogates. And I have these conversations every single day. So if a surrogate is planning a pregnancy and has access to the vaccine, definitely should do it. The only thing that is still up in the air at the moment is what happens when someone is already pregnant and whether they should get the vaccine. And at the moment, it's unclear. The recommendation, at least the CDC, recommends not to do it just because there's not enough data. The WHO, the World Health Organization, actually just changed their position, I think yesterday or today. And they say that if a woman can get the vaccine, that she should get it. So I'm sure within the next few months, that all is going to get clear, because the studies that originally didn't include pregnant women are now looking at pregnant women. So we'll have more information. And one last thing is sort of just a summary of the process. So basically, if you're ready to start, this is what we show you. So we usually start with the sperm. It's sort of a good way to, just the first step in the journey, right? Sort of dipping your toe in the water, make sure the sperm is okay. If it looks good, we freeze it, we do all the testing, and basically we have all that we need. While this is happening, you can choose your egg donor. Again, usually takes 1 or 2 months. We will help you with that. And in parallel, you'll work with the agency to find your surrogate. So as I said, you have the donor, we have the sperm, we make the embryos. As soon as you have the surrogate, she's screened, you have the contract, we schedule the embryo transfer. So like I said, there are many moving parts here, but again, we make sure, and working together with Melissa and her team, we make sure that everything goes smoothly. So I'm going to stop here. And I'm
Dr.
going to...
Levy, before you give it to me, someone typed a question that I won't know the answer to.
Okay,
So
it
says, does New England Fertility get involved with embryo adoption? We are interested in embryo adoption.
Yes, so again, that's a topic for a whole other discussion, but we do, of course, do embryo adoption. The problem is with embryo adoption is the availability of embryos. So we give people the option, people that have embryos frozen, that have basically completed their families, we give them the option to give their embryos for adoption. So we, not all the time, but we usually have 1 or 2 families, couples, individuals that have embryos that are donated. So yes, we do that. And of course it has to be the right match. So just before I hand it over to Melissa, again, like I said, this is the nutshell, it's all in a nutshell. So I'm more than happy to set up a time to talk and, of course, review your individual case and tell you, my opinion of how you should proceed. So with that, I want to hand it over to Melissa. As I said, Melissa is one of the pioneers. She probably won't tell you all of that, but she's one of the pioneers in this field. She actually one of the, almost the one that started this reproductive law specialty. She has her own agency. We've been working together almost from day one. So please.
Well, thank you very much. I paid Dr. Levy a lot of money to say that. So anyway, today I'm not going to take a lot of time, and I noticed that there's a lot of questions coming in through the chat. So most of them we're going to answer at the end. As I've been going along, I've been trying to type answers to them, but just so you know, we will get to all of them. And if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat, and I will distribute all of our contact information in the chat too, so that if you have questions afterwards that you could ask. So I'm gonna try to limit myself to 10 to 15 minutes to go over the process of finding a carrier, which is impossible for any lawyer to do. So it's going to be very brief, and if you have further follow-up, we'll be able to help you after. But one of the things that basically I like to answer the questions everybody asks me in the beginning is that one of the most important things about finding a carrier that you have to have, which is very hard, is patience. It generally takes about 4 to 6 months to find a carrier, and it can take longer, and it can take shorter, but very rarely does it take shorter. It depends upon your criteria and what you're looking for, and also it has taken a little bit longer during COVID because because of the travel restrictions and the testing that has to be done before carriers can come to a clinic. So that's important to keep in mind. The process itself takes about 1.5 years. You have to allow 40 weeks for the pregnancy, which is technically about 9.5 months. So as far as the surrogacy journey goes, there are 8 parts to it that I like to talk about. So the first is obviously the pre-pregnancy, before the carrier gets pregnant, and then the post-pregnancy. So when we first sign up for looking for a carrier, the first thing we're going to do is find out some information about you so we can match you with an appropriate carrier. For instance, if you want to abort a baby with a defect, we want to make sure that you have a person who's willing to have a termination. If you're pro-life, we would match you with somebody that's pro-life. Once we get that information about you, we also need to know, are you single? Are you married? Are you same-sex? What state do you live in? Do you come from a foreign country, so that we can make sure that legally we're matching you with the right person. There are 4 parts to our screening process that we're going to do. We're going to need to collect the medical records for Dr. Levy to review to make sure that your carrier is healthy and appropriate and safe to carry another pregnancy. Only about 2% of all carriers that apply to the program are accepted, so it is a rigorous screening process. We also need to do criminal background checks, home studies on the carrier. We do driver's license checks as well, sex offender registries, credit reports. In addition to that, there are interviews that we do. And then what we do is called a marathon day, and that takes place at New England Fertility or your doctor's office, where we are going to basically do a psych screening on your carrier and FDA blood work that's going to look for sexually transmitted diseases and all sorts of other things. So that's the beginning process, is we're doing a matching. You have to make sure that you're a good match with your carrier, and that we also have to do the screening process. The matching part is very, very important. So for instance, when I was looking for a carrier, I always knew that I needed somebody who was responsive. I'm the kind of person that likes to know everything immediately. And if my carrier was slow to respond, like she took 2 days, which is completely normal for some people, then I would get very agitated and have a lot of anxiety. So I knew that I needed to have somebody who was okay, like texting me back right away, but maybe not talking to me right away, but giving me results, from an ultrasound or a doctor's appointment sooner rather than later. Some people are more laid back and they can handle somebody who, maybe doesn't have as much time to respond. So you have to make sure that you have a good rapport and understanding with the person that you select. From a legal perspective, So there's a lot going on in the legal world now, and I'm going to give a little summary because there's a lot of people here from New York. So in a few days, the New York law will basically come into effect February 15th, and you can start using carriers from the state of New York starting then. So of course, we've been getting a lot of phone calls from our New York clients saying, oh, we want to use a carrier in New York. We want to use a carrier in New York. It'll be close to us. It's actually not that great to use a carrier from New York. The new law, which is beyond the scope, is a little onerous and not so great for both carriers and intended parents. The new law in New York requires, in order for the contract to be enforceable, that you pay for $750,000 of life insurance for the carrier for a year post-birth and during the pregnancy. During the pregnancy is normal to pay for life insurance. A year post-birth is pretty long. It also have to pay for health insurance, lost wages, legal expenses, and mental health counseling for a year post-birth, including any lost wages. Now, it might be normal for approximately 3 months after to pay for these expenses, but only if there has been some kind of complication in the pregnancy. It's extremely unusual to have to pay for expenses for up to a year after. So it makes it a lot more expensive for intended parents. In addition, certain parts of the contract are unenforceable in New York. For instance, the carrier has to have complete control over the pregnancy, meaning that she can decide anything, even if it doesn't affect her overall well-being. Like she can switch doctors, she can switch hospitals. None of the choices can be made in advance. So that makes intended parents very nervous, and that probably, I think, puts pressure on the surrogate because her word is not good because the contract in that sense wouldn't be enforceable. So as of right now, we are not really encouraging people to get carriers in the state of New York. From a legal perspective, we have, again, 4 things that we have to do. First is the contract. And this is a very important part because especially when we have professionals involved who have been involved in contracts, they start to think of this contract as they would a contract for maybe buying their house or maybe, entering into a business venture, and they start to put certain details in it that maybe may make the carrier a little scared. So for instance, you don't want to have a 72-page list of foods that the carrier can't eat or penalties that would scare the person. You want to pick what is maybe the most important to you. So for instance, when my carrier was pregnant, I had a thing that I didn't really want her to drink a lot of coffee. So I had, she would only have 1 cup of coffee a day. That was our agreement. Because I told her, these are the things that are important to me. Even though it's perfectly reasonable to go on an airplane when you're pregnant, I really didn't want her to go on an airplane. And I really didn't want somebody that drank a lot of coffee. So other people might have different things. For some reason, and it was, my oldest is 23, I did not think about whether or not she was around secondhand smoke. That didn't seem to bother me, but the airplane did. So who knows? Everybody has their thing, but you have to only pick a few of them. You can't pick a lot of them because you'll never find somebody. You're going to put things in the contract like how much she's going to get paid, basically what kind of communication, who's going to be allowed in the delivery room. You want to go over these things in advance because you don't want to find out during the delivery that the carrier doesn't want you in there if you really want to be in there. There will be certain provisions for her, like you'll be in there with due respect for her privacy. It's a meeting of the minds, the contract. Also, we're going to go over getting your name on the birth certificate. We are going to figure out what county we want her, is she going to deliver in? What state are we going to get your court order in? Do we have to do anything special because of citizenship of where the parents live? So that's going to be done in the 2nd trimester to get your name on the birth certificate. Also, a very important thing now is that we look at the intended parent's company. A lot of companies now are paying benefits for surrogacy, like Google and LinkedIn and law firms, and a lot of banks are giving money towards a surrogacy. So we don't want you to leave that money on the table if you do get money for this process. Also, we are going to go over your health insurance to make sure that we see that if you have coverage for IVF or if there are any benefits that you're not taking advantage of. The good thing about the Biden administration is that on Thursday of last week, they extended open enrollment for health insurance until May 15th of this year. So basically, we have almost the entire year of 2021 is going to be available for us to get health insurance for a carrier if we don't like the health insurance that she does have. So we are also going to need to get an escrow account. So this is one of the most important legal parts, is that in our agency, we have an escrow account. And an escrow account is essential because during this process, you really don't, as a parent, want to be paying the carrier directly. For instance, if she forgets to submit to insurance or she submits too much or too little, you don't want that financial aspect. There are business aspects to every journey. And part of the reason most carriers do it, obviously, is financial. I always tell people, I really love my job. I do it because this is why I had my kids. Sometimes I don't even consider it a job. But if tomorrow you told me that I was going to come to work and you weren't going to pay me anything, I would tell you you were crazy. So it's the same thing as a carrier. They really love being pregnant for other people, but they are being compensated. But it's not something that they should have to go straight to you about. So that should be separate. So that's why we have an escrow account involved. So in the process, again, legal, you're going to have insurance, contract, escrow, and getting your name on the birth certificate. So you want to make sure that somebody has all of these processes. A couple of people have asked information about costs, like how much you pay a carrier and how much the cost is. I'm going to put our information, both of our informations, our website and our offices will both send you cost information free of charge. It's not going to be a discussion for tonight because costs will vary based on what health insurance you have, what benefits you have, whether or not you need an egg donor and a carrier or just a carrier. So it's very highly variable. In addition, somebody also asked, would we ever work with a carrier in New York? You can absolutely work with a carrier in New York if you want to. The laws are different if the carrier is not paid versus paid. It's just that working with a carrier in New York comes with an extra level of costs, and you need to know that cost up front and be okay with it. It's not as advantageous to both the parents and the surrogate for the surrogate contract to be governed by New York law. There are some ways around it, but it's too much for the scope of this discussion. So if you do have further questions or a candidate in New York, it's something we should talk about privately. Okay, I think that was the fastest I ever talked. So next, I'm going to give the microphone over to one of our intended parents, our couples, and Natalie and Harold are going to answer a lot of your questions. They have one child through surrogacy, and they are going for number 2. So they're going to tell you a little bit about their experience.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you guys can see us, but we wanted to say first and foremost, hello, I'm Harold. This is my wife, Natalie. We are hopefully intended parents, going to be going on our second journey. But first and foremost, I just wanted to say that I think it's an excellent and wonderful idea for both Melissa and Dr. Levy to share this time with you guys to sort of explain like the process, because you know, while we were going through the process, we didn't have the benefit of attending one of these seminars. And so as we were trying to figure out what decisions we wanted to make, you know, it's just nice to know that there are now avenues and, you know, widely available for you guys to get as much information as possible. And I'm hoping that that's something that we can be for you. It's just another avenue of information and a different perspective on how this process works from start to finish. I guess with that said, we'll sort of just dive into, you know, what led us down this route. I know every one of you probably has a story that has led you here to this very moment, whether it's through heartache or something else. Ours, unfortunately, was both figuratively and literally because of heartache. You know, we've had some unsuccessful we tried unsuccessfully to get pregnant, and through that, we found out that my wife has a heart disease. And so, you know, it's just been an incredible journey for us to get here. And I know Natalie wants to just share a little bit about that in terms of what that was like.
Yeah, so as Harold was mentioning, we tried to do it the old-fashioned way. You know, we always thought that we'd get pregnant right away, and it was during a time where like most of our friends were having kids, and so we tried too, and unfortunately had a few unsuccessful pregnancies, and which kind of led us to finding out my heart disease, and which was sort of a blessing in disguise in a way. So this was about 5 years ago. And when my cardiologist told me that I had an 80% chance of dying, giving birth myself, we said, we really want to have a family. We just didn't know how to go about it. And, you know, at the time, there weren't that many resources out there about surrogacy and what to do. And it was kind of like a foreign subject. No one knew, none of our friends went through it. Our parents knew nothing about it. You know, it was still kind of new. So as Harold said, we started doing all of this research on what surrogacy was it right for us? Like how much did it cost? Like all the questions you guys are asking now in the chat is everything we asked ourselves.
Yeah, so nothing that you're doing is not normal or unnormal. I'm trying to say we've gone through the whole gambit in terms of like how do we do this? Where do we go? Who do we talk to? Who's important? Do you tell friends that you're going on this journey, or do you stay quiet because you're afraid there might be a taboo associated with surrogacy? But you know, let me be the first one to tell you this, that there is nothing wrong with going through this process. If you are successful, that baby is your baby. You're going to love them with your entire being, and you know you're fortunate enough that you're in a place where you can at least garner more information on how to make that complete family. And you know, I just want you to know that like as we were going through that entire process, you know, it was really through happenstance that we even came across Melissa. While we were thinking of like all of our options, surrogacy really wasn't even at the forefront. We were thinking of adoption, and Natalie came across a New York Times article that featured Melissa, and we read about this and we were like, hey, I think this is something that we should look into. And Melissa was great through the journey. We reached out to her, and she sort of, you know, gave us the story and background that she just finished going through with you all. And you know, we started to get more comfortable and liking the prospect of going through surrogacy. And, you know, it was definitely a journey to say the least.
We were eager to be parents. We wanted to do it right away. We had all our friends were having kids, and we were like, how long does this take? You know, we want this to happen now, happen tomorrow, next week. But, you know, it's a whole process, but it's so worth it. And when you look back, even though Melissa said, you know, it takes like 4 to 6 months to match, and then 9 months, you know, for the whole pregnancy, or 9.5, it's totally worth it. And it goes by like this. And they said that to us. And that's one thing that we still hold true to this day. Like our daughter's 2, and we feel like we just started this process. Correct. So, and now we're going through journey number 2. So we're really excited. Like I said, it's one thing that if you guys have been thinking about it, this is such a great first step. It'll happen. And like I said, it'll all go by within a blink of an eye. Yeah.
You know, just to go a little bit on the process aspect of it, I know both Dr. Levy and Melissa sort of gave you a high level overview of everything. And I'm not going to dive too much into the weeds on this, but I wanted to just hone in on something that Melissa said, and that was patience. You really do need patience for the process, because oftentimes while you're doing this is something that's going to be near and dear to your heart. This is probably one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make, and it's one of the most meaningful and impactful decisions that you'll make. And so as you're going through this, you sort of want to have an open mind about the process, and realizing, you know, who that you know, you're dealing with a gestational carrier who is, you know, so kind and so generous and willing to carry, you know, a baby for you that you get to see and grow and love and cherish. And so what I want to say is, you know, I know everyone has all these expectations bringing into it, and you're supposed to have that, but make sure that you are definitely open-minded in terms of, you know, your criteria when you're searching for a surrogate, because while there is a great pool of surrogates out there, you know, for us and for, I feel like most people, they want to try and go through this process as quickly as possible. And so it's very important that, you know, you sort of hone in on, you know, 1 or maybe 2 things that are sticking points for you while you're going through this journey. of choosing a surrogate, and not getting hung up on every little detail, because there's always something that you can nitpick and that might slow up and slow the process down for you. So just keep an open mind. And I just wanted to stress that point.
Going through the process too, I remember going back to, it's funny, Melissa's point about how when she had her surrogate, one of her biggest things is she only wanted her surrogate to drink 1 cup of coffee a day. So when we first started going through our journey, we had a whole list. This is our do's and our don'ts. And we quickly realized, and actually, it was,
I think
it was Brenda, one of Melissa's employees, who said, Natalie, you have to be real with yourself. As much as you can put it in a contract and say to someone, you can only have 1 cup of coffee a day. It's great. You can put it on your contract and all you want, but that surrogate goes and has 2-3 cups of coffee, you're never going to know. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to have patience, like Harold said, like Melissa said, and Dr. Levy, you have to have faith. You just have to kind of almost seize control. Somebody's carrying your baby for you, right? So establishing really good communication, feeling comfortable with who you pick. Really honing in on 3-4 things that are really important to you as a couple, knowing that, again, this person is carrying your baby for 9 months. After that, it's all up to you to raise this child. So what she or he eats, what they wear, where they go to school, what languages they learn, it's all up to you. So, again, focusing in on those 3 to 4 things that are really, what's the word that,
I think just things that are just vital.
Yeah,
that are
vital of importance to you are,
and keeping that number small.
Correct.
I know Melissa had said that we're going through our second journey, and one aspect of having the benefit of going through the process once is sort of just there's a little bit more or a little bit less pressure of going through this entire process. So you can sort of realize that, all the things that you would normally be anxious about. Oh, are we going to find a surrogate really quickly? Are they going to like us? Are we going to like them? All those things you sort of learn to let go with the process and just be, again, more relaxed as you've gone through it again. For instance, our first surrogate couple our first gestational carrier, she was a wonderful woman that lived in Minnesota, and she was fantastic. I mean, she was really informative and gave us, all the information that we wanted to know in terms of every time she went to the doctor, she would give us updates and things of that nature. And that's something that you can ask for. You can sort of have that relationship however you want to, whether it's through text, whether it's through phone, whether you want photos, whether you want to get involved with their family or not. It's really on you to sort of lay the ground rules for that. And so she was wonderful. And this second journey that we have somebody who both the mom and the I guess gestational carrier's husband they're social butterflies, and so they're extremely active and love texting, and we talk about TV shows and movies and everything underneath the sun, and it's just nice to see that no matter really who you get, you can sort of have whatever kind of relationship you want to have. And I think that that's pretty an amazing aspect of this is you're really, for better or worse, you're bringing on somebody and adding them to your family
if you choose to.
The
other thing to kind of give you guys a little bit of context too, we did end up using a different surrogate we are planning on using another surrogate for our second journey that hopefully will happen sometime this month, fingers crossed. So our first surrogate, we had a great experience with her. Her and her husband were great, as Harold said. We were planning on doing a journey number 2, actually, beginning of last year. So right when COVID hit. And the reason why we kind of split with them, although we still keep in contact with them, is we felt pressured by her to kind of do this second journey. And at the time, COVID, it was February, COVID just happened. We didn't feel comfortable. We said to her, look, we don't know anything about this disease, the whole country's shutting down. It's really bad here in New York. And
again, just to put some more context on that, obviously when this first hit, New York seemed to be ground zero for the whole world, or at least for the United States shutting down. And she was living in the Midwest where it wasn't hitting as hard at the time. And so we just had different perspectives on the nature of how serious the disease was and this pandemic. And so at the time, we while she didn't actively do anything that was, you know, invoking us to like go through this process, we just felt like, you know, it was in everyone's best interest if, you know, we sort of broke ties and for us to wait, so that way they would have the opportunity to try and match with somebody sooner. And so that's something that I just, you know, it wasn't any hard feelings or anything along those lines. Like I said, we still have a great relationship. I think we speak with them at least every week, if not every other week, just a simple text like, how are you doing, and so forth. But, you know, it was just the reality of the circumstance of this pandemic, which no one could have anticipated. And, you know, because of that, we're now going through this process. We found our second family. Again, you know, we know a little bit more about the process. As like Dr. Levy was saying earlier, we sort of know, we know more than what we did back in March and February of last year. And so that gave us added comfort to be in a position to want to go through this journey again.
Yeah. The journey itself isn't all rainbows and butterflies. I mean, it sure is now, but just
you want to say that? Harley's in the other room being a maniac.
We also like to manage expectations. I mean, it's hard overall. Like, again, going back to what we kind of spoke about a little bit earlier, you know, like everybody's circumstances is different. I, at the time, got diagnosed with this heart condition. So that was bad enough, and that was hard enough on me. But then knowing that I couldn't carry, you know, a baby myself was hard enough on me. So not knowing like what to research, who to research, what should we do? What's surrogacy? What is it all about? How much does it cost? You know, who do we talk about? You know, who do we talk about this with? You know, who do we even mention this with? And it can get lonely. It can be, you know, just depending on your support system, you know, who you have, who you're with, people around you. Like I said, you know, in our situation, all of our friends around us are getting pregnant, we're having kids, and we kind of weren't. So luckily now, like, surrogacy is, you know, with all the celebrities and all the media out there, like there's a lot more known about it. But, you know, again, it definitely, the whole journey has its ups and downs, right? It's a roller coaster ride, whether it's, you know, you being on pins and needles, like waiting for that positive pregnancy test, to selecting your carrier. And again, honing in on those 2 to 3 key things that you really want to focus on when it comes to, like, you know, kind of filtering or sorting criteria, to, again, understanding that you're seizing control, right? That somebody else is carrying your child for 9 months and you have really no control, right? As much as, you know, that all you have is a relationship and communication, and that honestly is key. And obviously you have the support system of both Dr. Levy and Melissa's team. So, but you're not going through this journey alone. It depends. You know, a lot of people ask us, like, when did you know? When did you start telling people? How did you tell people? You know, at first we didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell anybody. So it's all of it's subjective, but you know, we'd like to say, you know, we're here for you guys. If you guys want to reach out to us, I'm sure Melissa's going to pass along our contact information. We're here as a support system, whatever questions you guys may have.
Oh, no, I'm not passing along your contact information without permission.
Okay, that's fine. So, but if you guys need anything, you guys can reach out to Melissa, and then she'll reach out to us, and, you know, we'd be more than happy to, like, chat with you guys. Or again, sometimes all you need is just a good, strong support system, which you have with Melissa and Dr. Levy, because they're pros and they've done this. But, you know, again, we understand, like I said, the whole journey is a roller coaster ride. So it's full of emotions, and just like it is in real life.
Agreed. You know, one thing we touched on was definitely like the process leading up to the point where hopefully you're fortunate enough to become pregnant. But once that time happens and you do get that positive pregnancy test, you know, it's a waiting game. And yes, you are on pins and needles. Like you're waiting for the heartbeat doctor's visit. You're waiting for the 20-week anatomy scan, and you know, ultimately waiting for the day in which you hear that first cry. You know, I just want you to all to realize that, like, while Natalie is correct in that you're sort of giving up control over the process, you know, there's still certain things that you can do that are just as normal as any other pregnancy that out there. You know, we had a gender reveal party with our close family and friends.
Baby shower.
We did the baby shower. We what was that app? What to Expect? Where it tells you that your baby week 1 is the size of a pea, and then week 3 it's the size of a raspberry, and so forth. Like, we followed that throughout the entire process, just so that way we could feel some sense of connection to everything that was going on. And I really, fingers crossed, that you guys will all be able to experience that as well. And, you know, it's just an overall just great experience. And I think with that, we'll sort of wrap things up. And we're here for any questions. We'll be around for the Q&A if there's anything specific that you guys want to ask us.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Harold. That was fantastic and super reassuring for intended parents who are interested in surrogacy. We're going to turn things over to our gestational surrogate, Stephanie, to talk about her experience as a gestational carrier.
Hi, everyone. Boy, so much to say. I'm going to try to keep this condensed and try not to talk too much either. I met Melissa actually almost 15 years ago now. So I feel like I was one of the originals too. We had the first journey where I did deliver a set of twins for a set of intended parents. Really quick bio about me. I had my first son very young. I got pregnant while I was on birth control at the age of 17, senior in high school. Acceptances to multiple colleges that I ended up turning down and becoming a mom. And being a mom has been the biggest blessing of my life. But there was a lot of people around me and in my life that I felt deserved more than anything to be parents. And I had had such an easy, accidental time getting pregnant that I really struggled watching people around me struggle to become parents, to get pregnant, to carry a pregnancy to term. And so that's kind of what led me to surrogacy. I enjoyed being pregnant. Obviously, any surrogate or gestational carrier will tell you that if they don't enjoy being pregnant, then they wouldn't be there. That's not to say that none of my pregnancies had all of the normal discomforts. I've had nausea and vomiting. I had an episode of hyperemesis, the back pain and, the labor. I just had a baby 4 months ago and I'm still dealing with the postpartum hair loss, which is really attractive. So it's not just 9 months of carrying someone else's baby, but it's really, it's a lot that we go through as surrogates, but our dream is really just to make you a parent. So your dream becomes our dream. And that's kind of what led me to starting the journey. And I was told during my first pregnancy as a carrier that it was something that I was going to want to do again. And I laughed it off and I said, absolutely not. You're crazy. And look at me now. I've carried 7 babies for 5 families, which did include 2 sets of twins. I was very fortunate to carry 2 sets of twins full term, but I will say that that's very uncommon, and I'm sure the Dr. Levy can agree. I was able to work straight through both pregnancies until the end with the twins. I'm a nurse, and that's also abnormal. Most of the people I know that have been surrogates or have carried twins are typically out of work by the 28 or the 30 week mark. And so it is important for people who are considering twins to kind of take into account. I think in the beginning, a lot of people think that like, if you do 2 at once, it'll save you some money, but that may not be the case. And there's a lot of risks involved for the carrier as well, including just the C-sections. So I think I will pretty much just answer some of the questions that I get most commonly. I had no problem getting pregnant, clearly, on my own. And so if I wanted another baby of my own, I would have one. So I think a lot of people get kind of nervous, like, what if they want to keep my baby? For starters, Melissa and her team are going to make absolute sure that the contracts are tight and that if a carrier wanted to keep your baby, she couldn't, but that's not what we're here for. We want to make you parents as badly as you want to become parents. And so I think that's one of the things that people ask a lot. I get asked often if it's hard for me to give up a baby. That I think is the question that I get very regularly from people when they hear that I've been a gestational carrier. And my answer to that is really simple. As the intended parents that just spoke said, they give up a lot of control and they trust me to carry their baby. And so for me, I'm not giving up a baby, I'm giving a baby back. You're trusting your carrier with the most precious piece of tissue, embryo that could be. And it's her job to nurture it and take care of it and watch it grow until it's ready to be born. And then she's happy to give it back to you. 7 of the most amazing moments I've had in my life have been watching people become parents for either the first time or again. I've always had close connections to my intended parents. I still continue to have relationships with all of them. All of their kids call me Auntie Steph, and so I love to get the updates. My oldest surrogate kids are 14 now, and they text me. They call themselves the surrogate OGs because now they're the cool kids since Kim Kardashian used a surrogate. They're popular in school now. It's great. So it's a great connection that I have with all of them. People can choose to have those types of connections or they can choose not to. I can't speak for all surrogates, but I have a number of surrogates who have become very close friends of mine in the last 14 years that I've been in this process. And I've seen people who have used it more as a business arrangement, or they've, you know, had their child be born and the communication tends to decrease. It's going to decrease organically anyways, because people get busy. You've got a new baby, hopefully to take care of. And so those texts go from daily to weekly and then maybe monthly. And in some cases, maybe it's just yearly on their birthday, just saying, you know, happy birthday and getting a little update and a picture. And that's perfectly okay. Just the type of thing that you want to communicate ahead of time when you're talking to someone and when Melissa and her team are matching you. Those are the types of things that they'll think about and you'll want to talk about. I agree with the intended parents as well that it's hard for you know, for a surrogate to kind of change everything about her life. I made it very clear to my intended parents that I couldn't change my life to fit a pregnancy. I needed to fit a pregnancy into my life. So for me, that was working full-time as a registered nurse and going to school to be a midwife and taking care of kids as a single mom. I wasn't afraid of the process as a single parent, even though I've also been married during the process, because I have such a strong support system. And I think that's really important as well. Even if she's unmarried, to make sure that there are people there that are going to be, you know, supportive for her during the pregnancy. And so I had that, but I needed people who intended parents who could really respect the fact that maybe I couldn't answer every text message in 5 minutes. And if I was on a 12-hour shift, that it was probably going to be that long before you heard from me again. And also to trust that as a surrogate, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that we deliver a healthy baby into your arms. And so if that means not eating cheeseburgers and ice cream and all that extra stuff or drinking extra coffee, then we're totally okay with that. And so it's just that kind of balance between figuring out, you know, how to make everyone comfortable, but also to still have a life that we can live. And I also think that it's important to kind of let you guys know that as a surrogate, we really want you to have the experience that you desire. And that might be that really good open communication. And there are times, especially if there's an intended mother, where we are not sure how comfortable you are to hear those little things. Like, is the intended mom going to feel some type of resentment or pain when I text her and say, you know, the baby kicked for the first time, or it's going crazy right now, or anything like that. And so it's really important for you to kind of communicate with your surrogate about what you want to know. Do you want to know everything? Do you want to hear those things? Do you want to feel included? I had an intended mom who really didn't want to touch my belly when we were together, and she didn't want to feel the baby kick. I had some concerns that she was going to have some difficulty with bonding with the baby after the baby was born. And for some reason, she just wasn't comfortable, you know, touching my belly when her baby was in there. But the second the baby came out and she put her skin to skin, it was like that baby had come out of her. And it was just an amazing thing. So it's just, I was uncomfortable to a point because I thought that maybe I was doing something wrong, or, you know, so until we really had a conversation about how it just wasn't comfortable for her. And once I understood that, it made the relationship better. So if there's something that, you know, you really want or don't want, it's important to just have that conversation, because your carrier wants you to be comfortable. She wants you to have the best experience that you can have. And so just keep that in mind.
Oh, Stephanie, that was fantastic, and I thank you for providing everybody who joined us tonight with your insights and your information. And I think it's very reassuring, because there's a lot of mystery, I think, to a lot of people about what it's like to work with the surrogate, and it's very comforting to hear from you. So thank you. We've been answering a lot of the questions in the chat directly with parents, but just to remind everybody that contact information for Reproductive Possibilities and New England Fertility is in the chat. So you can find our information there, but also an email is going to go out to everybody who joined us tonight with a link to the video of tonight's event. So if you want to go back and watch something, if you missed any part of it, you'll be able to go back and review that as well. I want to thank Natalie and Harold for joining us and for providing their insights as intended parents. Again, Stephanie, that was fantastic. And of course, Melissa, your expertise is astounding, and I'm sure everybody got a lot out of it, and hopefully we'll be hearing from a lot of people soon. But again, contact Melissa and Dr. Levy anytime with any questions. Again, I'm Stephen Clapow from.
Okay, Stephen, I think we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a question. I'll repeat it because everyone can't see it, and is there a legal difference if the carrier is single or married? The legal difference is that if the carrier is married, then her husband has to participate, right? So if we have a married, and that goes for both sides. Like, we don't take intended parents where only one parent wants the baby and the other doesn't. You can't just split the baby in half like in the Bible, right? So we also, if we have a carrier who has a partner that's living with them, or they're legally married, that partner has to participate in the contract and the screenings, because when you're pregnant, you rely on your partner or spouse to help you, right? So that partner has to be supportive. Like, for instance, if the carrier is on bed rest, then the partner is going to have to pick up a lot of the slack, or if she's tired or she needs help around the house, or there are certain things that need to be done in the relationship. We want to make sure that the partner is in support. And Stephanie, I don't know if you want to make any comments.
Yeah, one of the hardest things that a carrier's husband has to deal with their partner is the contract where it states that they can't have intercourse for a certain amount of time before and after the transfer to secure success of the transfer. And that's written in the contract. It could be a month, 2 weeks, 6 weeks in some cases. And so I've seen that be one of the biggest hangups. But if they're not on board with that, then you can kind of guess that they're not going to be on board with the rest of the pregnancy. And in some cases, it can be hard for the partner of a surrogate, just as much as it is for the intended parents, because there's something about being with a woman who's pregnant with a child that's not yours. My ex-husband, which we didn't get divorced because I was a surrogate, he had trouble. I can talk about surrogacy all day. I love it. I wear the shirts that say, not my bun, like my oven and all that kind of stuff. But if we were at the mall and I'm 9 months pregnant as a surrogate and somebody says, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were pregnant. Congratulations." He's like walking away, because it's difficult for some people to kind of have that conversation with someone you haven't seen since high school. Like, "Oh yeah, that's my wife and she's pregnant, but it's not my baby." So those are just the kind of things that people think about when they have a partner that's involved. And so you really want to make sure that the husband of the gestational carrier, the partner, is just as much on board, because it's a long, much more than 9 month process for them as well. And the families get involved. My kids, it's kind of the same for them. Like, that becomes, my son calls them all his cousins, and I'm Auntie Steph. And recently he called this last one his sister cousin. because she doesn't have any siblings. And so he took it on himself to be a role model and a big brother to this little girl that was just born. And, you know, the first time he held her, he said to her, like, I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to be your big brother since you don't have one. But he had a mom who couldn't ride on roller coasters for 9 months. And so they make sacrifices too. And so it's kind of important to keep all that in mind during the process as well.
Okay. All right. I think that was our final question, I guess. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions. We appreciate you having joined us tonight. And thank you again to all of our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and special thanks to the Natalie and Harold and Stefan. So, you know, of course, you know, everyone has their own journey. That we call it a journey because it's unique, and everyone comes from a different place and basically has maybe different goals. But, you know, our job is to make sure that, like I said, that it's simple and safe and successful. And
we have more questions. I don't know if we have time to answer the last one. Would you like to, Dr. LeVay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And just one word for Stephanie, because I think, you know, well, I should say that Stephanie is unique. So not all surrogates are as eloquent and as intelligent as she is, but I think she's sort of, what she said is what most surrogates feel and how they come to this, to become surrogates. And I always feel, first of all, I always say that surrogates have, you know, a secure place in heaven for doing this, because it's the most amazing thing that you can do. And I always think that, you know, people worry, like Melissa said, about the drinking coffee or whatever, but I always see that the surrogates actually are very motivated, very compliant. And I often think they take better care of themselves when they're pregnant with your baby than they do with their own.
We definitely think about things a little bit closer. Like I would take, I'm not a risk taker in general, but I would take more risks if it was my own than I would with a surrogate. And I did see in the chat that she asked, I'm almost afraid to answer this question because I'm just very blessed that I have the uterus that I have and that I've had the experiences that I've had. The question in the chat is, have I ever experienced an unsuccessful pregnancy as a surrogate, and how did I deal with that? And I really, like I said, I don't want to say this because I don't want to get other people disappointed and discouraged. I've had 100% success rate with the help of amazing people like Dr. LeVay. Every embryo that's ever been put inside of me has come out a baby. And not too many people can say that, and I don't take any credit for that. That being said, like I said, I've been doing this for almost 15 years. My very best friend, who lives a town away from me, has also, we met in the craziest way, but she had actually worked with Melissa and had been a surrogate 4 years before I even met her, you know, about 18 years ago. And we've been best friends ever since. And I know probably hundreds, if not more, surrogates. And they take the loss as personally as an intended parent does. I'll tell you, going through that 2-week wait after you have the embryo transfer before you get the first blood work, we're on eggshells as much as you are. And it's like when it doesn't take, or when there's, you know, a miscarriage that happens, it is as heartbreaking for us as it is for you, because we really do get so invested in making your dream a reality that when it doesn't happen, while the clinical side of us knows that it's not our fault or that there wasn't anything that we could have done differently, there's a lot of responsibility that we feel when it's not successful as surrogates. And so it's a tough thing for us too. And in most cases, you know, then we have to stop medications. And again, I haven't had to go through this, but I've been a support system for a lot of surrogates who have. So, you know, you stop all of your meds and you have to wait for a cycle and you start the whole thing over. And of course, there's hormones involved with that, because now you've lost a pregnancy and you're already on all these hormones and going crazy. And so it can be really traumatizing for the surrogate as well as the parents, but it just gives them that much more incentive to, you know, to try again and to get you that ending that you desire.
Okay, so there are more questions coming in. So this is going to be the last one because I think we're running a little over. So Dr. Levine, I think this one is a little bit for you. So I'm going to read it out loud. If you could talk a little bit about whether your egg donors or anonymous, or can one have a relationship with them?
Yes, thank you. Well, again, this is a question that we can spend an hour discussing, but just in a nutshell. So essentially, first of all, as far as anonymity, it's probably, there's no longer such a thing, right, in this world. So we basically take that into consideration when we work with egg donors. So, you know, we used to categorize the donor as anonymous and known. Now we basically call them identified and unidentified. Because, you know, if we show you a picture of a donor, you can very easily Google her picture and find out who she is. So both for the donor and for the parents, that needs to be understood going into it. But basically, yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, essentially, you tell us what you're looking for. You know, you want it to be tall or short or blonde or brunette. And also if you want to know her, to meet with her, to have a relationship with her, maybe just on the phone or maybe through email. So you basically, whatever works for you, whatever your requirements are, we will review and we will find a donor. It may take a little bit longer if you have very specific requirements, but that includes basically what we call anonymity, whether you want to know her. Some parents want to meet with donor and actually sit across the table and be comfortable that they made the right choice. Not many, but some do, and that's what we do. So again, it's like I said before, it's a journey, and everyone comes in from a different place and has different needs. So you have to, you know, you basically have to look at it that way, and that's how we address it.
Fantastic. All right, so we've really nailed all of our questions for real this time. Again, this is a long good night, but everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Reproductive Possibilities. Thanks to our gestational carrier and our intended parents. And hopefully we will hear from you all soon. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.